Walz made himself fair game, since his only attack was that the other guy was weird. Because everyone is weird, the more you get to know them. It's why marriage is a commitment. Over time, both spouses realize we're all bat crazy. But there's weird and there's dangerously insane. And that's thinking children can decide to have themselves castrated. And that's Tim Walz. Poor Kamala Harris has created her own scented candle. And just like her, it gets lit every night. She's a drunk.
Greg Gutfeld delivered a savage, hilarious takedown of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, tearing through their political credibility with razor-sharp sarcasm and rapid-fire wit. He mocked Kamala's rambling word salads and nervous giggles, while blasting Walz's indecisive, task force-heavy leadership. Like a demolition crew on caffeine, Gutfeld spared no one, turning political nonsense into a punchline. If incompetence had a face, he just smacked both of them with a dose of brutal, unapologetic reality.
CBS's 60 Minutes was caught editing their interview with Kamala Harris to make her look better. It's a shocking ethical lapse. Mike Wallace must be rolling in his grave. Not over this, though, but that his son is Chris Wallace.
I think it's very important, as you have heard from so many incredible leaders, for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past but the future.
You know, that's some bad weed. Generally, when people get high, they actually have some interesting thoughts. Not her.
Greg Gutfeld didn't just walk onto the set. He stormed in like a caffeine-charged satirist sent by the comedy gods, armed with razor-sharp sarcasm and a devilish grin that said, "Brace yourselves." He zeroed in on the political train wrecks, known as Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. This wasn't a roast, it was a double demolition. With every punchline, he chipped away at their credibility until the political stage resembled a Minnesota freeway in February, cracked, broken, and full of gaping potholes no one could ignore.
If Kamala remained a constant, then what impacted the polls? And it's driven by identity politics.
We're going to cook today.
Okay.
Is an Indian recipe.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
you are Indian.
Yes. Yeah.
And you all helped us win in 2020, and we're going to do it again in 2024.
What would Trump have to say about Kamala's qualifications?
Well, you know, she's flip-flopping, Greg. I mean, these are flip-flops. And Indian people and blacks wear flip-flops, which is good, but...
He kicked things off with Kamala Harris, the vice president with the resume of a career bureaucrat and the speaking style of a glitching GPS. Gutfeld dove into the odd cadence of her speeches, mocking the zigzagging sentences that sound like someone freestyling after swallowing a thesaurus, according to him, every time she talks. It's hard to tell if it's policy or blackout poetry delivered during a total power outage.
One of them, Politico says, is like Waltz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is his wide eyes. That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that?
Sorry. Still.
Gutfeld compared Kamala's delivery to someone who just discovered metaphors and now dumps them on everything like overused seasoning, whether they fit or not. When it came to substance, he didn't hold back, roasting her ability to address real issues with all the depth of a puddle in Phoenix. He joked that asking her to explain inflation is like asking a cat to do your taxes. Plenty of noise, zero results. She dances around problems like they're landmines made of fragile glass, nervously laughing and serving up word salads so tossed, you'd swear they needed a side of dressing.
With Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face, you know? I mean, he forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird that for a terrifying threat to democracy that Trump is, not a single interviewer in his history has approached him with trepidation?
You'd ask Kamala Harris for clarity, but what you'd get feels more like a TED Talk delivered by someone who clearly skipped rehearsal. Gutfeld highlighted her infamous ability to dodge tough questions with the finesse of a political magician. Watching her in interviews, he joked, is like watching someone play dodgeball with reality facts come flying, and she ducks behind phrases like, let's be clear, only to never actually be clear again. He compared her communication style to tuning in to a cooking show, only to hear the host explain how to make lasagna using cloud metaphors and nervous laughter. There's no insight, just an interpretive dance of confusion. Then Gutfeld turned his attention to the border crisis, a major responsibility for Harris that she seems to treat like a gym membership technically hers, but rarely visited. He roasted her for treating the border like it's part of a magical fairy tale. If you ignore it long enough, it might just fix itself. According to Gutfeld, she's more likely to visit Mars than McAllen, Texas. And when she does speak on immigration, it's with the urgency of someone giving a weather report for a storm in another country.
I want to see this in slow motion. You'll see Walz extends his hand to his wife. She grabs it, they shake, he pulls her close, and then goes in for that non-friction hug, all the while still shaking her hand. I wish there was a word to describe that. Oh yeah, weird.
Just when the studio audience thought Greg Gutfeld couldn't get any sharper, he shifted his focus to Tim Walz. If Kamala Harris was the queen of confusion, then Walz was her court jester of indecision. Gutfeld portrayed him as the kind of leader who walks into a crisis with a clipboard and walks out with a shrug. Under Walz's leadership, Minnesota became a case study in how to turn a once proud state into a bureaucratic carnival. He tore into Walz's lockdown policies like someone who had personally endured every confusing Zoom directive, mask, and government-issued contradiction. Gutfeld called him the captain of the SS Maybe, drifting aimlessly between restrictions and guidelines like a confused DJ, spinning policies no one asked for. One day, gyms were closed. The next, you could wrestle in them if you wore oven mitts. Health policy, Gutfeld joked, looked like it was written by a committee of squirrels on Red Bull. Then came the crime wave. Gutfeld slammed Walz for treating rising crime like a rumor he hoped would vanish. As Minnesota's cities descended into unrest, Walz responded with more meetings, more press releases, and the occasional expression of mild concern.
As a teacher, my #1 responsibility in the classroom is the safety, security, and belongingness of every single child in that room. These are children my son's age, a 4th grader, a 10-year-old who just wants to go to the bathroom, and their identity is they are male or female, and they just go in that bathroom and use it, end quote. Sounds so folksy, you know? Belongingness. Yeah, they'll be belonging in therapy with this guy at the helm.
Gutfeld described Tim Walz as a man who must have read the leadership manual backwards, starting with blame everyone else and skipping over take action. The real kicker, he said, watching Walz speak to the media was like watching a substitute teacher try to explain nuclear physics to a kindergarten class. Awkward, unnecessary, and completely lost. From his tone to his cadence, Walz lacked conviction. Gutfeld mocked him for having the charisma of a soggy mop and the vision of a bat in daylight. He didn't lead, he lingered. He didn't decide, he delayed. And when things went wrong, he acted as if someone else had hidden the fuse. But Gutfeld wasn't done. He circled back to Kamala Harris with the precision of a roastmaster on a mission. He tore into her tenure as California's Attorney General, claiming her reform efforts were more about headlines than actual justice. He suggested that her memory of her past positions changes depending on the audience calling her, the political equivalent of a chameleon with Wi-Fi, always updating and adapting her stance, not based on principle, but on who happens to be listening.
A question of what can be unburdened by what has been.
We see what can be unburdened by what has been.
To see what can be unburdened by what has been.
Believing in what can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been. What can be unburdened by what has been.
What can be unburdened by what has been.
Having faith in what can be unburdened by what has been.
See what can be unburdened by what has been.
To see what can be unburdened by what has been.
You know, if Kamala gets dementia, it would be an improvement.
Gutfeld brought up Kamala Harris's famously awkward public appearances, where she often bursts into laughter at the most inappropriate times, like a real-life buffering wheel. According to him, her nervous giggles could power a small wind farm and usually show up the moment she realizes she doesn't have a real answer. He quipped, asking Kamala a yes or no question is like setting off a Rube Goldberg machine. What follows is complicated, noisy, and completely unrelated to the task at hand. Then it was back to Tim Walz because, as Gutfeld joked, there's just too much material to ignore. He couldn't resist skewering the Minnesota governor's obsession with task forces and panels. Every problem from policing to potholes seemed to require another study, another committee, and another taxpayer-funded excuse for procrastination. Gutfeld compared Walz's approach to how people deal with laundry. Just keep adding to the pile and hope someone else handles it. He also mocked Walz's handling of education, pointing out declining academic scores while the state funneled millions into programs that sounded like rejected TED Talks. According to Gutfeld, Walz cared more about slogans than solutions, offering lofty language while schools collapsed under bureaucracy. Education in Minnesota, he claimed, resembled a failed political science experiment where students weren't learning to think or read but to memorize. Politically convenient buzzwords. As the roast reached its peak, Gutfeld paired their flaws, like a sommelier of dysfunction, Kamala's incoherence and Walz's indecision. Two sides of the same flailing political coin.
What is with this administration and the spouse swapping of the VP and the president? We saw it before. Like, Dr. Jill didn't kiss Joe like that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And now he couldn't wait to get that full embrace. It wasn't a bro hug, it was a yo hug. And he put his wife in the friend zone.
Yes.
Which is always, that must have been a fun car ride home.
Yeah.
Why can't you hug me like her husband? I mean, it's just, it's weird.
It is weird. You know, Joey, I think that it's okay to take Walz's picadillos, if you call it, apart, because remember, he broke the seal by calling Vance weird, and we're all weird, including him.
Yeah, we're very weird. I'm weird.
One gives speeches like she's reading from a scrambled teleprompter, while the other governs as if he's flipping a coin he lost halfway through the toss. Together, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are the political equivalent of a slow Wi-Fi signal, always buffering, never loading. Gutfeld wrapped his tirade around the absurdity of their combined influence. Kamala, the vice president who occasionally steps out of her echo chamber to deliver half-baked inspiration, and Walz, the governor who manages his state like he still thinks leadership comes with a microwave setting. He imagined the two in a room, trying to solve a crisis. Kamala unleashing a word salad so tangled that even AI would short-circuit, while Walz nods, launches a task force, and quietly exits through the gift shop. Their public personas didn't escape either. Gutfeld mocked Kamala's carefully constructed media image built like a fragile Jenga tower of curated interviews, glowing headlines, and canned empathy. In contrast, Walz came off as a walking 404, aerobland, forgettable, and somehow still running a state neither seemed equipped to lead, but both excelled at avoiding accountability. The audience roared when Gutfeld compared Kamala's vice presidency to a group project where she never shows up, but still takes credit while Walz runs Minnesota like he's still stuck waiting for the tutorial to load.
So Kamala Harris is the Democrat candidate for president of the United States. I'll give you a second to come to. The border czar who couldn't find our southern border on a map of Texas now wants to be America's commander-in-chief. Kamala couldn't lead a campfire sing-along, let alone the country's armed forces. But does that matter? Not to the media. Now, they would like this framed as a team sport battle, left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. But in reality, it's the media narrative machine versus reality.
Gutfeld likened Kamala Harris to an automated voicemail, friendly, vague, and completely useless in an emergency. Meanwhile, he said Tim Walz handles crises with the urgency of a sloth on sedatives. There was no need for shouting or exaggeration. The facts, he argued, were absurd enough on their own. From Kamala's baffling soundbites to Walz's constant policy ping-pong, everything from rising crime and economic confusion to educational decline was fair game. Empty speeches, photo ops, and press conferences crafted to say absolutely nothing. Gutfeld simply held a mirror to their records. And the reflection was pure comedic gold. By the time he wrapped up, Kamala's hollow platitudes and Walz's chronic indecision were no longer hidden behind political spin. They were laid bare, stripped of polish, and served to the audience on a silver platter of sarcasm. Gutfeld didn't just roast them, he deconstructed them, revealing the empty core where real leadership should be. And yet, he left the door wide open, as long as Kamala keeps speaking in riddles and Walz governs like he's reading invisible instructions. Gutfeld will have more material, another press conference to mock, another headline to dissect. The circus hasn't left town. It's growing, and Gutfeld's front row seat is permanent.
Who made her first major speech last night since Trump took office, and it was another classic ball of verbal vomit. Here she is referencing a viral video of elephants. Watch.
Who saw that video from a couple of weeks ago? The one of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo during the earthquake?
Gutfeld circled back like a sniper with a punchline. once again locking in on Kamala Harris's habit of showing up late to every major political moment and leaving even later without saying anything memorable. He joked that if she ever got a Netflix special, it would be titled Delayed Arrival, starring zero substance. Every appearance, he said, feels like a dress rehearsal for a performance that never actually happens. She steps on stage with the confidence of a keynote speaker, delivers a tangled mess of metaphors, tosses in a few awkward laughs, then disappears like a magician with commitment issues. Meanwhile, Gutfeld didn't spare Tim Walz, painting him as a governor turning Minnesota into a real-life tutorial on how to run a state into the ground without even breaking a sweat. He mocked Walz for treating leadership like he's always playing defense in a game no one else is watching. Gutfeld quipped that Walz probably wakes up every morning and checks what California did wrong just to make sure Minnesota is doing it slightly worse. It's not leadership, he said, but imitation laced with hesitation, cleverly packaged and sold as progress.
I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps. I wonder, is our strength our diversity?
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is.
Then came the haymaker. Gutfeld pointed out that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz perfectly represent what happens when style completely overtakes substance. They're the political equivalent of wrapping an empty box in shiny gift paper from a distance, disappointing up close. He called Kamala's laugh a national mystery, and Walz's plan for the future an urban legend. Gutfeld quipped, if Walz ever announced a bold new initiative, you'd need a translator, a decoder ring, and 6 months just to figure out what it actually meant. He painted a vivid picture, Kamala at the podium, confidently delivering something that sounds profound until you replay it 3 times and realize it was just verbal jazz. Meanwhile, Walz stands beside her holding a binder full of buzzwords, clearly unaware of what chapter he's even on. Together, they're like a political duet with no melody, both speaking, neither saying anything. And the best part? Gutfeld wasn't even close to being out of material. There was still plenty left to roast, more absurdities to unearth, more broken promises, and plenty of broken sound bites waiting to be turned into pure comedy gold.